In this lesson, we are going to look at adding in some of our columns and our anchor rods. To start, we are going to be in our setup looking at creating our base and cap plates, and then we are going to want to download and open up pages S1, S2, S5, and S6. To get to our base and cap plate schedule, there is two ways we can go about this. We can either go into our search field here and type in base, and then we can see base/cap plate schedule there. Or from our home screen, under project settings, under our connections inside of the job settings, we have our base and cap plate schedule. Either way should allow you to get to that. So go ahead and open up your base and cap plate schedule. You can see by default there is a BP1 in here. Well, if we take a look at sheet S5, we can see our column schedule. For this, we are going to work left to right inside of this window. For BP1, we're just going to make that our first 16 by 16 by inch and a half base plate type A. So we just need to compare back to type A and our dimensions shown in the base plate. So BP1 is fine for our piece mark. The plate type, we have either rectangular or round, and in this case it is rectangular. Our thickness is 1.5 inches. So for this, we can either type 1.5 or we can go 1 space 1/2. One way we can add the little space there between the 1 and 1/2 is you can hit the 1 and then the plus arrow will work as a space key. So you go plus 1/2, and then we can specify the length that is parallel to the web and the width that is parallel to the flange. For our length here, we can see it is a 16 by 16, so I can either type in 16 for our length, or I could go 1-4. Either way will give us the same results. And we can see there is 4 holes in here, so we know there's 2 whole rows and 2 whole columns. For this, we'll leave our whole column set at 2. And then the column spacing, we take the overall plate minus 1.5 inches minus 1.5 inches, and we'll get 13 inches or 1'1". And then we will do the same for our row spacing since this is a symmetrical plate. Next, we're going to go ahead and specify our hole type. Well, in this case, since it calls out that it is going to have anchor bolts in there, we'll just leave the hole type as anchor bolt. Looking at type A, we can see it is a 1-inch diameter anchor bolt. So we don't have to change that here. And we can see our hole diameter is automatically set for the oversizing based on the hole type that is set. If we wanted to, we could come in here and specify the welds for this base plate. So with this, we can specify for each of our different base plates if we wanted to use different weld types. In this case, I'm not going to make any changes. Then we could specify our steel grade, and then we could go into the more options. We'll take a look at the more options here in a little bit. Moving to the right, we can see we have a base plate type B, that is 10 by 10 by 1. We're going to call this BP2. And then I'm just going to hit tab on the keyboard, and it is going to be a rectangular plate. We can see the thickness is 1 inch. The length or diameter and the width are all going to be 10, so I'll just type in 10 for both of those. Now here's where we can get kind of confusing. How many whole columns and whole rows do we have? So for this, we can see our whole columns are called out as parallel to flange. So those columns are going to run parallel to the flange, where the whole rows will run parallel to the web. Well, in this case, we can see we only have one whole column. So I'm going to type in 1, and as soon as I hit tab, we can see it grays out our column spacing. And then for our whole rows, we will have 2. Because we know our rows are running parallel with the web, we know there will be 2 rows for this one column. The row spacing will take 10 minus 2 minus 2, so in this case it'll be 6 inch. Hole type is going to be anchor bolt. The bolt diameter is 3/4, so as I'm tabbing through this, it's just automatically filling that out for us. Now the 3/4 is just the default size in there, so that is why we got that in there. We didn't have to fill anything out. So the hole diameter is automatically determined based off of the bolt size, or the bolt diameter. We aren't going to change any welds. We're not going to set any steel grades. And then for this, we don't need to go into the More tab. Going to the right, we see another base plate type B with the same size, so we don't need to fill out another one because we will just use BP2. Going to the next column over, we can see it's calling out a cap plate and no base plate. So for this, we're going to go CP1. And it doesn't call out a type, so we can just assume that there is no holes in this cap plate. So we're going to leave that rectangular. We're going to specify a thickness of 1/4 inch. The length and the width are both 5 because it's a 5 by 5 by 1/4. And then for hole columns, we're going to assume there is none, so we'll just type in 0. Tab out, we can see it turns that field gray. Hit tab one more time to go into the hole rows. Type in 0. Row spacing is going to gray out as well. And then it doesn't really matter what we put for our hole type bolt diameter because there is no holes. And then the steel grade will leave it A36. And we'll continue on to line number 4. Going to the right, we see it is a base plate type A, but is a different size. It's a 10 by 10 by 3/4. So for this, we'll go BP3. It is rectangular, so I'm going to go ahead and tab out. Our thickness is 3/4. And then our length and our width are both 10 by 10. So we'll go 10 and 10. And we know it is symmetrical, so there's going to be 2 whole columns. And the column spacing, again, we go 10 minus 1.5 minus 1.5, so basically 10 minus 3. So that brings us to 7. There's 2 whole rows. And again, that spacing is going to stay the same as 7. Anchor bolt for our hole type. And then bolt diameter, we can either type in 1 in this field, or we can use the drop down and select one, either way. Go and tab out. And then we could specify our steel grade, which I'm just going to leave the default A36. Looking to the right, we can see that both the base plate and the cap plate are as required, so we don't need to fill anything out there. And then the next one is a type C, and we can see there is a base plate and a cap plate. Well, the cap plate is the exact same dimensions as the previous cap plate, so we don't need to fill that out. But we will go ahead and go BP4. And if we look at type C, it is an L-shaped plate. When we build these L-shaped plates, we are going to build it as if it was rectangular, and then we're going to add those legs to that. In this case, we can see it is a 10 by 10 by 1.25 inch. So we're going to go thickness of 1.25. We could come in here and specify a length of 10 inches, the width of 10 inches, and in this case, because of the holes being the way they are, we are not going to fill this out. Those are in the leg, and we'll use the More tab to get those. So for our hole columns and hole rows, we're going to go 0 and 0. It is an anchor bolt, and it is calling it out as a 1-inch anchor bolt. And then we can just tab through this and see the rest of the information there. Now we can hit the More button. In this More tab, we see we have a left side, right side, bottom side, top side, round plate holes, additional holes, and then drain/vent holes. The left, right, bottom, and top are going to allow us to go in and add legs to our base or cap plates. The round plate holes will allow us to add holes to round plates in a round fashion, and specify an array and everything that way, which we'll take a look at next. And then the additional holes tab will allow us to come in here and add any holes we would want that are not on a specific pattern. So maybe we have some that are not symmetrical. Maybe we only have 3 holes on a plate. we can use this additional holes tab to add those holes. And then the drain and vent holes, if we're using galvanizing or need those vent holes, we can specify what style we would want. For this, we're going to take a look at our left side and our bottom side. If I start at the left side, as soon as I click in the leg length field, we can see this little white arrow or the white lines appear, showing that is the field that it is asking for. Looking at our drawing, this is going to be 6 inches. Our horizontal to first column of holes is going to be 8 inches. Our column of holes is just one column, so we don't need to worry about a spacing. And then our vertical to first hole on the near side is going to be 3 inches. We're only going to have one row, so we don't have to worry about the spacing. And the vertical to first hole far side is going to be 3 inches and only one row. Now we need to do the same for our bottom side. So I'll select bottom side. And again, as soon as I click out or click back into that leg length field, we can see that white line shows. It's going to be 6 inches. Our vertical to first column of holes in this case is 8 inches. And we are only going to have one row. We don't have to worry about a spacing. And then our horizontal to first hole near side. Looking at the drawing, that is going to be 3 inches. And then our column of holes, we just have one, and we don't have to worry about a column spacing. Then we have our horizontal to first hole far side, which is also going to be 3, and we only have one column of holes there. Don't have to worry about a column spacing, and we're just going to go ahead and say OK. Now as soon as we say OK here, we can see our More button now has an eye or an information indicator next to that, indicating that we have filled out information in there. The next plate we're going to take a look at is our Type D plate, which is our round plate. For this, we'll type in BP5. We'll change our plate type to round. And as soon as I do that, we can see it grays out a few of these fields. We have a thickness and then a length or diameter. So in this case, our thickness is going to be 3/4 inch. Our length or diameter is going to be the 1'1". As soon as I hit tab from there, we can see it took us over to our hole type. I'll hit tab one more time, and we can see it is calling out 3/4 inch diameter anchor rods. And then I can specify a steel grade. And then to add these holes, I'm going to go into the More tab. And then I'm going to go to the round plate holes. In here, we can specify the number of holes we want. So in this case, we need 4. Next, we have the degrees between holes, which that automatically is calculated based on the hole count. Then we have our radius. In this case, is going to be 4.5. So I can either type in 4.5 or 4 space 1/2. And then I can specify a pattern angular offset, which in this case we don't have one. So we're going to say OK. One thing you will want to make sure is that you do say OK to this once you are complete. If you hit cancel, it will not save any of the work you just did, and you would have to go through and reset this up. So again, make sure and say OK. We're going to get this warning or alert that says, note that changes to these marks will not be reflected on gather sheets with a drawing of the original mark. What this is saying is if we had already detailed these plates or the submaterials and had these on gather sheets, it would not automatically change the drawings. We would have to redetail those plates to see the correct information there. In this case, I'm going to say OK. And now it has saved that file off. To show a couple more things here in our base and cap plate schedule, I'm going to open this up, and this is just for example. If I wanted to, I could copy this plate straight down, and it would just create a BP6. It copies across all of that information exactly to a T. So I would have to go in and make a change to that if I wanted that. Having two identical plates with different marks will not work inside of SDS2. It will only use the one mark for the plates in the model. There must be a difference in the plate for it to give you a different piece mark. For this, you could add something like a 0 diameter hole or change the steel grade. To delete a plate from the list, all you have to do is delete out the piece mark. As soon as I delete that out and say OK, if I go back into my base and cap plate schedule, we can see there's no longer that BP6. So if I deleted CP1, for example, out of there, that would automatically condense that list down into only having the base plates there. In this case, I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to say OK. Now that we have our base and cap plate schedule set up, we're going to want to take a look at creating or adding in our columns, so that way we can add in our anchor bolts. For this, I'm going to go open up modeling. So if you don't have a modeling session open currently, you can either select this cube here, or in my case, I already have one open. I'm just going to browse and select that. With my model open, we're going to take a look at sheet S1, S2, and S5 for this. The reason we need all of these sheets is because S1 is going to show us the rotation of the columns. S2 is going to show us both the rotation and the top of steel for the columns. And then S5 is going to show us what base plate is needed for what column. So I'm going to start with the column at A and 1. When we are adding in these columns, all we need to do is we're going to go to our members page, and then I'm going to select my column add. Being that I am going to use this over and over again, maybe I want to select the pin to quick access. As soon as I select that, we can see that is then pinned on the left side toolbar. So I'm going to go ahead and select column add. And as soon as we do that, we can see we have this bar come across that's going to ask us our section size and a whole bunch of different information. We can see our locate page is automatically brought up and has all of our point locators in here. So looking at our column at A1, we can see that is a W10 by 49. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in here. I can go ahead and either type that in here or hit the browse and browse for that section size. Another nice thing with this is if I am browsing the section size, I can just type in W10 and it's going to automatically snap us to that, and then I could go in and select the W10 by 49. When I say OK here, it is going to update that section size, and then it's going to ask us some more information. These fields that are grayed out do not apply based on the materials we have. So in this case, we have a toe direction if we were using an angle or a channel. Next, we have our reversed, and we have a double or a single material, again, if it was an angle or a channel. Next is our bottom. If I hover over this, this is going to ask me for my connection type. If I drop that down, we can then see we have an option for auto standard, we have an option for plain end, user base and cap plate, we have clip angle, user defined, auto base cap plate, our splice plate, or we have shear. In this case, we're going to use the user base cap plate. When I select that, that's then going to ask me what number is that. Well, in this case, we know from looking at sheet S5 that this is going to be our BP1. However, if I didn't know what number BP1 was, I can hit this browse button, and it is going to bring up our base and cap plate schedule, and it's going to show everything that we filled out in that schedule. In this case, I'm going to select BP1, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then we have our elevations. We can lock that in. So if I wanted to, I could type in 99-2 for the bottom. And then on the top end, we can specify the same thing, the connection type. In this case, we don't have a cap plate, so I can just leave that at auto standard. And then I can lock in our elevation here. With that locked, looking at sheet S5, it shows it going to the roof, but it says elevation varies. If we look at the framing plan, we can see it calls out the elevation of 126 foot 0. And we can see there is no plus 9.5 or anything here, so we'll go 126-0. The next question is our column rotation. The column rotations are going to always follow the web of the member. A 0-degree rotation will have the web running horizontally, where 90 degrees will have the web running vertically. A positive rotation will rotate the column counterclockwise. In this case, we can see it does need to be rotated 90 degrees. One way I like to remember my column rotations is I just remember the word high, H-I. H is going to be your 0-degree rotation, where 90 degrees would be your I. With all of our information here filled out, I'm going to go ahead and select A and 1. If we zoom in, we can see the wide flange outline there. Now looking at our button bindings, we can see left click is for locate, middle click is repeat, and right click is return. So we got to be careful that we don't middle click to try and pan, as that would repeat or add that column again. Looking at S2, we do see that W10 by 49 is the same and same rotation at AN2, so I can middle click there to repeat that last column. And we do see the same at AN3, so I can middle click here. And then we do see we can repeat this at B1. And looking at sheet S5 as well as S1, we can see it says the exact same column is at B3, however it is a different section size, so I cannot repeat that. We can, though, repeat that at D1 and at D3. So all of those are the same, and then I can just change my section size here to a W8 by 48. And then I can locate that at B and 3. Looking at our next schedule, we can see we have the W8 by 48s that are at B2, C1, C2, and C3. So we're going to take a look at that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to leave this at our W8 by 48. And then I'm going to change our base plate to use that BP2. So again, I can browse, select BP2 and say OK, and now that updates. Again, I can lock in my elevations. And if we take a look at C1, C2, and C3, we can see that those are not all going to be at the same elevation. C1 and C3 are, but C2 is going to be plus 9.5 inches. So we need to make sure when we are adding this that we are watching our elevations. So we're going to start at C1. C1 we can see does need to be rotated back to 0 degrees. So I'm going to hit 0. And then I will single select to locate that at C1. And then I can middle click at C3 to repeat that because that is an exact copy. Now if we look at B2 and C2, those are the same rotations, they're just up 9.5 inches. So I just need to come in here and type in 126-9 and 1/2. Again, I can use the plus symbol on my keypad to add that space between the 9 and the 1/2. I'm going to go ahead and locate that at B2 and C2. The next columns we're going to take a look at is at D and 1.9 and D and 2.1. If we take a look at S2, we can't see those columns at D1.9 and D2.1. For this, we'll look at S1 and we can see those in there. we can see the rotation is going to be 0 degrees. And it is W8 by 31. So for this, I'm going to go W8 by 31. Looking at S5, it is the same BP2. And looking at this, we can see it calls out the W8 by 31 starting at 99 foot 2 and then going up to the second floor at 114 foot 6, but there is a bolted splice at 110 foot 0. For this, what we're going to do is we're going to change our elevation here to 110-0. Because of the way SDS2 adds these splice plates or these spliced connections, these are going to be two separate members. So we're going to add the first one from 99.2 to 110 foot 0. Our top connection then needs to be changed to a splice connection. So we'll select our splice plate, and then I'll locate that at D1.9 and D2.1. And then from there, we can go 110 foot 0, and then our top elevation then is 114 foot 6. And then we need to look at our connections. On that low end, that is now going to be a splice connection. And on this upper end, then that can just be back at our auto standard. I can then select it D and 1.9 and D and 2.1. For this part of our training, we aren't going to worry about the column at D and 2. And we aren't going to worry about the upper ones at E and 1.9 and E and 2.1. We're only going to worry about the pipe 6 standards. So for this, we need to type in our section size of pipe 6 and then STD for standard. We need to change our bottom end connection again back to our user-based cap plate. We can see that is that type A, that is the 10 by 10 by 3/4. So I can browse, and we can see that is BP3. Our bottom elevation is going to be 99 foot 2. And then our top elevation here is 107 foot 8. Now pipes and tubes do still have a column rotation, but in this case it's not going to be as crucial as these are going to be round or square. However, if you do have a rectangular tube, you will need to pay attention to these rotations. For this sake, we're just going to leave this 0, and we're going to locate these at E and 2.1 and E and 1.9. The last column we're going to take a look at for this first part is going to be at E and 1. At E and 1, we can see that is an HSS 4x4 by quarter, and that is our base plate type C. So for this, I'll type in HSS 4x4 by 1/4. Hit tab, and we can see that capitalizes that all, meaning that it found it. And then we're going to browse and select our base plate BP4. I'm going to say OK. And then the elevations are 99.2 and 107.8 already, so that is correct. So we're just going to locate that at E and 1. At this point in time, we have our columns in here for what we need at this point for our anchor bolt plan. So I'm going to right click out of this to complete the column add. To take a look at these columns, if I want to see them in solid and make sure they look correct, I can either hit SA on the keyboard for solid all, or if I select them all, I can right click and go into my member styles and select solid opaque, solid transparent, or solid transparent main. Or inside of my display, I have the option for change all to solid opaque. So I'll select that, and then we can see our columns with our base plates. And we can verify our rotations of the base plates and everything are correct. We will get into some more options here with the creation of these plates and everything in a future video. If I wanted to take a look at these columns a little bit more, maybe I wanted to see what they looked like. Holding down my shift key, we can see my middle click button binding now becomes rotate. So I'll shift and I'll middle click over a member and rotate, and we can see that in an isometric view. However, these columns look fairly short. Again, that's because my depth check is turned on and I'm only seeing 3 foot in and 3 foot out. If I undo this depth check, we can then see our full columns. In this case, I'm going to leave that on, and I'm actually going to open up our AB plan again. For this, I'll go to Layout, select Open View, and double click on AB plan. The last thing we're going to take a look at in this video is on sheet S6, and that's going to be our anchor rods. Looking at our typical anchor rods, we can see it's just calling out a 1'6" anchor rod with 3 inches of threads above the base plate and 3 inches at the bottom. For this, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our members, and then we can see under the steel we have the anchor rod add. If I select this, it's going to ask me to locate where I want that. Well, I could select the same point twice, and we could go in and fill out this information. So we could go in, specify that it's straight, the anchor rod diameter, what piece mark prefix do we want, the steel grade, the sequence, if it's graphical or galvanized, and then we can go in and specify our overall length, which in this case would be 1'6", our thread lengths, which is going to be 3, the projection above base plate is at 3 inches. Our projection above concrete, which is just going to be the 3 inches plus whatever our thickness is. So I'm going to go 4.5. Our base plate thickness is 1.5 inches. And then the grout thickness, in this case, maybe if I zero that out, we can see it takes some of those fields out or makes those not pink. And then our embed length. So that's going to be from the bottom of the base plate to the bottom of the anchor rod. In this case, it's going to be that 1'6" minus 4.5. So it'd be 1'1" and 1/2. As soon as I click out of that, we can see that is all good to go now. We could come in and specify our top nuts, the intermediate nut, and then the top washer, intermediate washer, the rod types, the bottom thread, our bottom thread length, the projection below material, and our bottom washers and bottom nuts. If I were to add it this way, I could say OK here and then copy that anchor bolt around, or I have an easier tool that we just need to add to one of our ribbons. So in this case, I'll hit cancel. We'll go to our customize option for our rolls. We'll want to edit the detailer modeling. Go to the ribbon configuration and hit the edit button. For this, maybe we want to add this inside of our members area as well. So I'll go to my members page. And if I wanted to, I could add this right to our steel section. So I'll change our section here to steel. And then I can either search for an item or go to the menu item group. But in this case, I'm going to search anchor. And we can see we have a couple different tools here. We have an anchor rod tool or add sag rods as anchor rods. In this case, I'm just going to use the anchor rod tool. So I'll just hit this little plus icon there. We can see it's listed here in our section. And we can see if I expand the steel, we see that in there now. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And then I'm going to save yes. I'll say OK here. And now if I go to my members, we can see it does show that under steel now. For this, I'll expand this out. select our anchor rod tool, and then this is going to ask me how I want to select this to add our anchor rods. In this case, I'm going to leave that at member, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. If we take a look at our status line here, it says select column to add anchor rod. I can do this on a 1x1 basis, or if I zoom all the way out, I can window around all 16 columns that are in here. I'll select all of those and hit enter on the keyboard, and now we can see I'm adding anchor rods for 1.5" thick plates with the piece marks of BP1. It is a very similar window, however in this case now I could just go 1'6". Our thread length, maybe I will leave that at 6. It doesn't really call out our threads at the top. What is our projection above base plate? That is just going to be 3. The projection above concrete, if I go 4.5 here, so if I just went 4.5, because of our grout thickness of 1, that wouldn't be correct. So maybe I want to call that out as 5.5. Our embed length would then be our overall length minus our projection above concrete. So that's going to be 1'0" and 1/2. And now we can see everything is good to go. Again, I could specify the top of base plate nut, the top of base plate washer, the bottom of base plate nut and washer. We can specify each of our nut types and each of our washer types here. In this case, I'm just going to say OK. And now it added all of those to the BP1s. Now we're looking at those that have a piece mark of BP2. In this case, we are just using the same typical anchor rod. So in this case, it's going to be 1'6". Our thread length we'll leave at 6. The projection above base plate is 3. Our projection above concrete, so maybe I want that again to be our projection above base plate plus our plate thickness, which is 1, plus the grout thickness, so that's going to be 5. And then our embed is 1'1". Again, I could go in and make any changes to this. Maybe I wanted a different type. I wanted it hooked instead of a straight or a stud. In this case, I do want it straight, and so I'm just going to say OK. And then we have our anchor rods for our 3/4 inch thick plates. Again, the overall length, I'll go 1'6". We'll leave our thread length at 6 inches. We'll leave our projection above base plate as 3 inches. Our projection above concrete, again, is 3 plus the 3/4. Plus, in this case, maybe I want it that 1 inch, so that'd be 4 3/4. And then our embed will go 1'6" minus 4 3/4. So that's going to be 1'1" and 1/4. As soon as I tab out, those fields turn back to white. Say OK. And then we have the last ones for our BP4, which is the 1.25" thick plate. So again, 1'6". The threads are fine at 6 inches. The projection above base plate is 3 inches. The projection above concrete, I'll go 3 plus 1.25" plus 1 inch for grout thickness. So in this case, that would be 5 1/4. And then our embed thickness is going to be 1'0" and 3/4. I'll say OK. And then it's going to ask me if I want to add another group of anchor rods. In this case, I'll go ahead and say no.